Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Law and Legitimacy. Happy day before Thanksgiving. I'm camped out in northern Vermont, just south of the Canadian border, and I'm watching the snow fly. We got 3-4 inches last night. It was down to about 12. It's winter, in case you hadn't noticed. And it is a cold season up in Vermont. Cold in the rest of the country, too. Cold in Oakdale, Louisiana, where Owen Shroyer remains incarcerated on his 60-day bid for the crime of speaking his mind. But I did promise you an update on its condition, and here it is. Owen Shroyer has been released from solitary confinement. He's no longer in the SHU. He is in general population. According to the Bureau of Prisons website, his estimated release date is December 18th. Of this year. I expect that once it gets calculated at the end of this month, it'll be bumped up a few more days, and it wouldn't surprise me to see him released as early as the 14th or 15th. I think your cards and letters and books and attempts to deliver them have had a great impact on the Bureau of Prisons. There have been a lot of confusing reports about what gets through and what doesn't. Some people have said they've sent cards and they've been returned, but yet I know Owen has received cards. Some people have sent letters. All letters, including the letter I wrote to him, were opened. Some of them get sent back. Some of them get to Owen. He's received about 300 letters, as near as I can tell, and scores, if not more than 100 books. Those of you who have inquired, can I find out if he got your book? I just can't. I mean, I have a limited amount of time with him. But he's back in general population. It turns out that, as near as he can tell, the offense he committed was misuse of the phones. And apparently, as I suspected, the Bureau of Prisons concluded that when he called a friend and reported on his condition and gave a message to the world, as it were, and that message was played on InfoWars and other outlets, the Bureau of Prisons took that as an offense against prison policy. He had, even though he's a prisoner, a right to notice and an opportunity to be heard before more punitive conditions of confinement were imposed. He didn't get a hearing until after 2 weeks of confinement. I'll let him talk about what happened at that hearing when he's released. Obviously, we know that all eyes in the Federal Bureau of Prisons are on Owen right now, and I don't want to say anything that will prejudice his situation or that will have a negative impact on his situation as he remains in custody. How did he get into custody? Some of you are new to this fight, so let's review it. Owen Shroyer is an outspoken young man. He's a 30-something guy who believes that the Constitution and the country are imperiled, and he speaks out. You might refer to him as a Christian nationalist. I'm not sure I know what that term means necessarily, but he believes in Bible-based truths, and he speaks those. He speaks them daily from a platform in Austin, Texas, known as InfoWars. InfoWars, as many of you know, is Alex Jones's shop. Owen is the afternoon personality in something called the War Room. It's on 3 or 4 hours a day. He and Alex and others in 2020 were supporters of then President Donald Trump. And when the election results turned out the way they did, not on election day, because as we all went to bed that night, Trump looked like a winner. But several days later, and by November 7th, when absentee ballots were counted, Donald Trump was declared the loser, and people were upset about it. You may recall Stop the Steal rallies. Owen and others attended a Stop the Steal rally in D.C. in November. I believe it was on November 14th. They then attended another rally on December 12th. During all this period, President Trump engaged in efforts to hold the White House, to stop what he referred to as the steal. Whether those close to him believed there was a stolen election, whether Donald Trump actually believed it or not, that's the subject of ongoing litigation that's tearing the country apart. And even as we speak. In any case, on January 6th, a joint session of Congress was to certify electoral votes. And the plan was that, according to the Constitution and federal law, both houses would convene in joint session. And under the leadership of then Vice President Mike Pence, they would consider certifying electoral votes on a state-by-state basis. In that process, if one senator and one congressman objected to certification of an individual state's votes, each house then went into separate session and for a limited period debated that objection. It was anticipated by the various sergeant-in-arms on both the Senate and House side that this process would take several days because there were objections coming. Trump spoke that morning on January 6th, 2021 at the Ellipse, right behind the White House, a short walk from the Capitol. And at that speech, he urged Mike Pence not to certify the election. In my view, the mistaken belief that Pence had that inherent power. He called on people to march to the Capitol. He said he'd be there with them. Folks then went from the Capitol, or from the Ellipse to the Capitol, and the rest, as they say, is history. But it's history now that's going to be written and rewritten over and over and over again until we arrive, if we ever do, at a common conception of what actually happened that day. Because what happened is very much in doubt. At around 1 o'clock or thereabouts, in the area of the Peace Circle, there were crowds milling about, and as the surge of people from the Ellipse merged with that crowd, the crowd broke, and the crowd overcame a fence, went into Capitol grounds, and then there were standoffs at the Capitol, and there was violence in some portions of the Capitol, and then there was a lot of nonviolence as people protested and milled about. Who started it all? What happened? Why? That is now a topic of ferocious debate online, and in the wake of the release of tens of thousands of hours, potentially, of videos taken that day. House Speaker Mike Johnson has promised to release them all. I see Laura Loomer's out there saying he hasn't done that yet. I don't know. I know plenty have been released, and I'm seeing a lot of debate about it right now. Owen was part of that history. He went as a journalist with InfoWars to cover it. And as they marched from the Ellipse, because that day, the night of January 5th, Alex Jones and Ellie Alexander were scheduled to speak at the Ellipse on the stage with Donald Trump. And it was vetoed that night that they wouldn't do so. So Owen and Alex and company were standing in the area of the Ellipse, confused. There are videos of it. What do we do next? What's going to happen next? They headed toward the Capitol, and when they arrived, it was obvious that violence was taking place. There were sounds of flashbang grenades and a surging, angry crowd here and there. And Alex Jones, at that point, took to his megaphone, and he didn't urge people on. He urged people to cease and desist, to not give the left what it wanted, not to engage in violence, not to engage in something that would become a signal event in recent American history. Because listen to me, and listen to me carefully. Your reaction to J6 is a response to what the government did that day. It's not a response to what the protesters did. We've always had protests in this country. There have been angry mobs that have gotten out of control. Yes, it did so at a historically significant location, the Capitol, as electoral votes were being counted. But don't for a moment be seduced into the lie that somehow our democratic institutions were at stake or this was part of a coup. The counting of the ballots was delayed 6 or 7 hours. And if anything, they ceased counting far quicker than they expected to, because as I said moments ago, the sergeant at arms of both the House and the Senate expected the electoral count to take several days. After the riot was cleared late that evening, the votes were certified, and the rest is history. Owen appeared on Capitol grounds on January 6th with Alex, and they asked police officers for permission to get onto the Capitol steps so that Alex could use his megaphone to direct the crowd elsewhere. Alex did. Owen stood by as he did so. Months later, Owen was arrested. And he was arrested and charged with a series of misdemeanors, including trespass, what amounts to trespass, entering and remaining on Capitol grounds when he didn't have the authority or permission to do so. His prosecution is different than almost the prosecution of any other person on January 6th for the following reasons. In 2019, Owen appeared at a House impeachment hearing conducted by none other than New York's Jerry Nadler. Owen disrupted that proceeding by marching up to the dais and basically saying that Nadler should be impeached. He was removed by officers and charged with a breach of peace sort of offense. And in a separate court proceeding, he entered into what's called a deferred prosecution agreement. He did this in 2020. And under that agreement, he was to perform 32 hours of community service and not enter Capitol grounds with the intent to cause a disruption. That was the language of the agreement. He notified the federal government that he'd completed his community service in early 2021 and asked them to dismiss the charges. No, they said. You were on Capitol grounds on January 6th. There's an investigation. What's more, you're 2 hours short on your community service. Owen had miscalculated. So what he did is we did two more hours of service. He submitted an affidavit. We moved to enforce the agreement, and that motion lingered on a court docket, unreached for adjudication, while the federal government pursued its case against Owen for his conduct on January 6th. He was arrested. He waived a grand jury. In other words, he didn't require the government to take his case to a grand jury. The government sought his phones and his electronic devices to search them, we think, looking for evidence that they never found anywhere. That is, that the events on January 6th were directed and coordinated by someone in the White House. Owen voluntarily gave those up. He voluntarily sat for what's called a proffer session. He waived his Fifth Amendment right to be silent and answered questions that prosecutors had. And he told the truth. And how do I know he told the truth? If he hadn't, they would have charged him with lying. So Owen cooperated. He was not a cooperator. He didn't rat anybody out. I've seen some online chatter about that because there was nothing to rat out. He did what Americans are permitted to do. He petitioned for the redress of grievance. He peacefully assembled and he spoke his mind. On January 6th, as he marched to the Capitol, he chanted such things as 1776, death to traitors. Now you're saying, why would a journalist say such things? He's a journalist, a citizen blogger. The case law from the United States Supreme Court recognizes that blurred category. The government took the information that Owen gave them, and I don't know what they did with it. They never charged Alex Jones or any of the other people Owen was with. Owen entered a guilty plea to trespass, and then came sentencing day. And prior to sentencing, the United States government did something I never thought I would see happen in the United States. And it's something that tells you and should tell you that the Constitution is up for grabs, that the character of the people we have deciding what its grand and majestic clauses means is everything. And politics matters. It's not a game for elites. It's not a corrupt game of pocket pool played by people without any sense of virtue. It's where the nation's soul gets tried, tested, and debated. And then, the folks we have in the Justice Department right now have taken their mandate to do justice. And what they've done is they've criminalized dissent. They've criminalized what happened in January 6th in a series of shocking prosecutions. And Owens is one of the examples of it. In its sentencing memorandum to the court said, or the government said, that Owen needed to be punished. He needed to be sent to prison because millions of people listened to him. He needed to be sent to prison because he was spreading disinformation about a stolen election in the weeks and months prior to the election. He needed to be imprisoned because InfoWars is a large platform with a broad reach, and to send a deterrent message, Owen needed to be made an example of. While the probation department, who did a pre-sentence report on Owen to assist the judge in determining what an appropriate penalty would be, concluded that the appropriate penalty would be probation, the government wanted 120 days. Now you'll say 120 days, that's not much. Some of these guys pulled decades. The point is, it was a trespass offense. And at the time of sentencing, when the judge came to consider Owen's character and the nature and circumstances of the offense, he was permitted to consider what is known to lawyers as relevant offense conduct. What is shocking about Owen's sentencing is that the government used and the court considered protected speech and Owen's status as a right-wing journalist to punish him. And it's just obvious on the record that it did so. And it basically, the law doesn't give you the right to say anything you like whenever you like it under any circumstances. You can't defame somebody. You can't conspire to commit a crime. You can't incite people to commit violence. These are all exceptions to the First Amendment guarantee of freedom of speech. But you can have any opinion you like about public events. It's what you do with that opinion that matters. So Owen spoke out and he engaged in trespass. He was on Capitol grounds when he arguably didn't have permission to do so. The elements of that offense are being there and knowing you're not supposed to be there. Owen pled guilty to that. We could have argued that he wasn't there with the intent to disrupt, which is all the deferred prosecution agreement arising out of the Nadler case came to, but we didn't argue that. There were good reasons to believe that the Capitol grounds were clearly marked off that day and Owen shouldn't have been there. But what the government did was, and that is so shocking, is it asked the judge, Judge Timothy J. Kelly in the United States District Court for the District of Columbia. It asked Judge Kelly to send Owen to prison because of what he said before the event. And because afterwards he tried to talk about the event as something where the American people spoke and showed Congress that they were serious. Those are not crimes. They have never been crimes. They are not incitement. They are not defamation. They are not conspiracy. They do not prove Owen's state of mind in engaging in simple trespass. When Judge Kelly sent Owen to jail for 60 days as a result of his speech, he did something that should be anathema. He crossed a line that should never be crossed in a United States courtroom. He crossed a line that was significant enough that the First Amendment prohibited what happened. And that is he sentenced Owen in part on account of Owen's protected speech. So we've taken an appeal for Owen. We asked Judge Kelly to leave him out of jail until the appellate court heard it. Judge Kelly said no. We asked the appellate court to leave Judge Owen out until they decided it. They said no. So we had a briefing scheduled where our brief was due December 13th. The government filed a motion to dismiss the appeal, saying, hey, he took a deal. He should be held to the benefit of the contract. Our position is no. The government broke its contract with the United States of America by punishing a journalist for his speech. So this week we filed in the United States District Court a motion, our opposition to their motion to dismiss, and we also filed our so-called merits brief, and you see part of it there on the screen. I'm not sure if we can post it in a way that you can find it, but what we argued is that something fundamental happened in the Owen Shroyer case, and what it reflects is a cancer in the Justice Department, and that cancer has a name. It's called Merrick Garland. What the Justice Department has done with respect to January 6th is truly repulsive. This was a 6 or 7 hour riot that day, which pales in significance to the damage done to institutions in the so-called Summer of Love in 2020, when people traveled interstate to engage in arson, and not a one of them was prosecuted by the feds, as near as I can tell, for interstate arson. What the Justice Department has done is spent any amount of money to locate and identify each and every person on Capitol grounds on January 6th, and they vowed to prosecute each and every one. There are more than 1,000 open files thus far, and they are still making arrests based on people they identify as the result of an ongoing investigation. Think about that for a moment. We're almost 3 years away from January 6, 2021, and the United States government is still spending significant resources to lock people up for participating in a protest that turned into a riot. When has that ever happened in American history before? It hasn't. The best analog I can think of is look at the reaction the United States had to the Civil War. Over a 4-year struggle in the 1860s, 600,000 Americans were killed in a civil war where we fought brother against brother, sister against mother, father against son. And when that war was over, we stacked the bodies one by one and decided that we would go about the business of trying to become a community again. We decided that we'd put aside our grievances and try to learn to live together as one. It hadn't been easy, and it hasn't necessarily been accomplished. But here's what we didn't do. We didn't prosecute and incarcerate every person who was a rebel. In fact, within 3 or 4 years, almost every rebel had been repatriated in the United States, and we went about the business of nation building. Merrick Garland and the Biden regime have chosen to do otherwise, and in so doing, they have broken faith with an American tradition that government is rooted in consent and an understanding that consensus that it takes to govern is raw, unfolding, and that we will value the dissenter's point of view. Merrick Garland needs to go. The Biden administration needs to go. I've said it here before. I'll say it again for those of you who are newcomers. I'd vote for a pumpkin in 2024 rather than vote for any Democrat, because what I'm afraid of, if we leave a Democrat in office, if we leave Joe Biden in office, or we put in that stunt dummy, what's his name, Mike, out there in California, Gavin Newsom, that left-wing stunt dummy. If we put him in office, we're going to continue to get more prosecutions. And the cell that Owen Shroyer warmed up these last few months, the solitary cell that he in the shoe that he occupied for speaking out while in prison, the nerve of him, that shoe will become yours when you speak out. So pay attention, pay close attention to the Owen Shroyer prosecution. Pay close attention to the 2024 elections. I don't know who's going to get elected. I mean, we've got Joe Biden mumbling his way through the moves. There are those who say Kamala Harris might step forward. I hear people whispering about Michelle Obama. Gavin Newsom's got his eyes on the prize. They're running against Donald Trump. According to what I read in the newspapers, Trump's ahead in the polls, but should he be convicted in any of the various prosecutions against him, he might lose some swing voters, and we might be up against, we might have to offer a candidate out of the wings. I mean, Joe Manchin, is declaring an independent candidacy, and things are very fluid. At this moment, partisanship probably matters more than it has in recent decades, because the country's fate is at stake. And what's at stake is the meaning of our Constitution. The Constitution is written in broad and majestic terms because each generation has to decide what those terms mean for itself. For example, the Fourth Amendment's guarantee against unreasonable searches and seizures. It's nowhere written in the Constitution what reasonableness means. It's up to judges to decide that. The First Amendment's guarantee of freedom of speech. It may seem obvious on its face, but what constitutes speech and what exceptions exist to that? Judges make those decisions, and presidents appoint those judges, and presidents are elected by people. Here's what I think's happened in the country as a result of January 6th. A different Justice Department would have prosecuted a handful of people for trespass and maybe some for violent felonies, and those persons would have been sentenced and released by now, and January 6th would have become a minor footnote in American history. Instead, it's becoming larger and larger an event, and it's becoming larger and larger an event because that's what Merrick Garland and the Biden administration want to do. I've sat in court and stood in court during sentencings of the Proud Boys. I represented Joe Biggs. I now represent Zach Rail in the prosecution that took some 5.5 months, as regular listeners know, to unfold earlier this year. I heard the government beg the judge to send a message that this must never happen again. Well, what is it that must never happen again? That we shouldn't have a minor riot at the Capitol one day that disrupts things for half a day, or that the people should never gather on the steps again and be in a position where they might become enraged and act out. I think people are afraid to dissent right now. They're afraid to dissent because lawfare in the United States has taken on a new and sinister shape, and that shape is the prosecution of dissent. If you're a conservative Roman Catholic, you need to be watched out. If you're worried about teaching your children about transgender rights in kindergarten and first grade, you need to watch out. The FBI may be watching again. If you're worried about what's going on with respect to open borders, you might be on another list, and the list goes on and on and on. And when the Justice Department has the right to decide whom to prosecute, and the judiciary merely rolls over and plays dead for it, who protects your rights? We need a different and better class of judges. We need a different and better class of Justice Department. And the only way we're going to get it is by having a better and different class of leaderships in the executive branch and in Congress. I think there's a recent, if you want to get a tragicomic look at what's going on in Congress with judges, consider the nomination of Sarah French Russell to the United States District Court for the District of Connecticut. She's a young woman, at least by my standards. Most of you are young. She's 47, 48 years old, Yale Law School graduate, former federal public defender, and served on all the right commissions. Got her ticket punched in all the right ways. Yale Law Clinic, federal law clerk, college professor, United States Sentence Commission person, liberal do-gooder. So she gets appointed to the United States District Court, and she appears, or she gets nominated. She appears for her confirmation hearing, and she, by the way, forgot to tell the Senate certain details about, for example, having written a letter to the governor of Connecticut in March of 2020, urging him to empty the prisons, urging him not to incarcerate anybody who came into the prisons, all because of COVID, suggesting in her letter that we needed to have a moratorium on holding pretrial detainees, and that we should release illegal immigrants from federal detention when they are so. She even wanted Joe Biden to tell the federal government not to lock people up in Connecticut anymore, as though he had that power. When she was confronted with this letter by Senators Cruz and I think Kennedy out of Louisiana, she forgot. She forgot she wrote it. I'd say take a look at her confirmation hearing. You'll see it on YouTube. I think we can post a link to it. She did as well as she could, if in fact she forgot. But basically, she is unfit to serve on the federal judiciary as far as I'm concerned. I don't want judges who decide that their role is to make public policy. I want judges who recognize that their responsibility is to enforce the law, and it's a law created and sent by others. I don't think the Senate has acted on the Russell confirmation yet. Knowing the Senate as I do, I'm sure the Democrats will fall in lockstep and support her 100%. I think Republicans will probably oppose her. And right now, she's probably a jump ball selection. But take a look at the Sarah French Russell thing and ask yourself whether, if you were accused of a crime and went in front of a federal judge to give an explanation of your conduct, you'd be satisfied with the type of explanation that she gave to Congress. Basically, what she said is, my dog ate the homework and I forgot my dog's name. And for this, she expects a lifetime appointment to the bench. For this, she expects the people's trust as she interprets the broad and sweeping language of the federal Constitution. She's as dangerous, in my view, as is Merrick Garland. So, I've been on a rant here, guys. I apologize. I wanted to give you, and I'll kind of bring this riff to an end by reminding you again about Owen Shroyer and other J6 defendants. If you know a loved one who is incarcerated as a result of their conduct on January 6th, you need to look that person. And even if you don't, find a name. Look that person up on the Bureau of Prisons website, put their name in, click the link that says inmate locator, put their name in, and then send them a letter. The letters really do matter. We have very little ability as lawyers and as human beings to influence what the Bureau of Prisons does to an inmate, but we do have the ability to let them know the whole world is watching. And I would say you should flood the inbox, the mailbox of every J6 prisoner with letters of your support, because what will happen is the Bureau of Prisons will open them to determine whether they can give them to the inmate, and they'll read them. And by knowing what you think, it may be that at the margins, their conduct will change. In the last week, I've had several conversations with congressmen and congressional staff members about Owen and other J6 defendants. Congress is getting interested. So build a bonfire, call attention to these issues, and they will come. And they may well come around. But more importantly, as regards 2024, decide what kind of country you want to live in, and then decide which party better represents it. If you want prosecutions based on political beliefs, if you want judges who will roll over and say no, or say to the defense, but say yes to what the government wants, then vote for Biden. Or vote for Gavin Newsom, or vote for the next, or vote. You can go ahead and even vote for Kamala Harris if you can get yourself out of, if you can avoid the idea that we'd have a detox queen as president. But if you want something better, find a party that's doing better. From my perspective, I'm looking at the Republican Party right now. I'm looking at the Republican Party because, as I said before, I'd vote for a pumpkin before I'd vote for a Democrat next year based on what I've seen in the Department of Justice. But I do think the Republican Party can do better than a pumpkin.
Well, and I do believe that the most recent global events with Israel, Palestine has brought a broad number of, and the reaction there too, by our government and by many members of our society has brought many people who may have been on the fence there on the left side of politics into the Trump possible world, which was largely unexpected. I think people who were staunchly anti-Trump are now acknowledging that the state of things cannot be, I guess, lied and explained away anymore. Right.
Well, and I think that's right. I think identity politics in the end becomes the politics of resentment, because if every identity is precious and we live in a world where there are limited goods and services that have to be distributed somehow, anybody who's on the short end with a privileged identity, and that's everybody these days, is going to have an appeal to justice and a justification to use violence to get what's theirs. Now, events in the Middle East are tragic and they have a long history. The Arab world was opposed to the creation of the state of Israel from the get-go. They rejected territorial offers from the United States under the British mandate, declared war on Israel at the get-go, and they allied themselves with the Nazis and engaged in pogroms long after they had ended in Eastern Europe. And the violence continues in the Middle East. Now, no one in the Arab world is calling Hamas to account, basically saying you can't kidnap, rape, and murder civilians to get what you want. And I think that many who might otherwise be sympathetic to the Palestinians have to own the fact that in this case, Hamas has behaved like savages, and that the response to savagery from the civilized world has to be a firm and resolute no. And if that no involves violence, so be it. There are such things as just wars, and the war against Hamas, at least thus far, is just.
Well, and my point is even, I think, easier to get to than that, which is many people who have aligned themselves politically with sort of that straight ticket Democrat, big D Democrat partisan platform have begun to realize that their personal interests from an intersectional perspective have now been pushed down the totem pole so far that they can now see that they're not important. Right.
One of those intersection, that's one of those words we need to strike from the English language. So if you're on a bus today and somebody comes up to you and talks about intersectional rights, offer to punch their ticket and get them a transfer to anywhere. I mean, you want a one-way trip to Toledo? Go, just don't come back. And there's nothing against the good folks of Toledo, but we just don't want your lunatics in our town. I see Freedom Lover. Do I know where Joe Biggs and Zach Rell are? I do. You'll have to look them up on the Bureau of Prisons. I would encourage you to do so. You'll find mailing instructions and how to get addresses to them. But, if you're listening to this and you care about the fate of the country, I'd say write a J6 defendant today. You can decry some of the behavior they engaged in, but you can support their right to speak out, and you can say no to an administration that is seeking to penalize it. Because as God is my witness, that's what's going on right now. And don't let anybody kid you that this is a neutral and detached administration of justice. You've got a Democrat nominee to United States District Court writing to a governor, let our prisoners go because they're going to get sick from COVID. And you've got that same administration saying, let's lock every person that we can find up to send a point to other generations. This must never happen again. That's King George speaking. That's burning down Boston because of the Boston Tea Party. That's not the American people saying, no, this is our country, and you mess with us at your peril.
We will be live tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Eastern Time to wish you a happy Thanksgiving and to discuss the one aspect of this show that I think we did not get a chance to get into. That is the X lawsuit against Media Matters.
Yeah,
and then the corresponding move from the Texas Attorney General to open an investigation, criminal investigation into Media Matters, and the consequences of what is about to come out of this lawsuit. What we're realizing about the parallel efforts to essentially control the internet and or continue to keep it free for people to speak their minds. Elon Musk is looking more and more like a figure we will write about hundreds of years from now.
Having said that, did you see that Fire, has come out opposed to Musk on this, claiming that basically he's engaging in an anti-SLAPP piece of litigation that needs opposition. So it's a complicated issue, as my wife says whenever I say something.
We may be talking about
complicated than that.
We may be talking about two different issues, right? Media Matters versus I'm talking about the advertising stuff, not necessarily from the river to the sea stuff, because there are two unique issues here, and so we'll get into that. We'll get into that tomorrow. But I guess the big message here for our viewers and listeners is that while everybody else is taking a day off, Norm and I will be here for you. So
because the world matters. And in Mike's case, because he cares about the Republican mind, I may be snowed in with nothing else to do, and I may be saying, help, send turkeys. It's cold up here.
You can find us here tomorrow morning on X at LawPod Daily. You can also find us on Rumble, as well as on YouTube, Law and Legitimacy, LawPod Daily. We'll also make sure that the audio-only versions are uploaded to our podcast platforms, so Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Overcast, Audible, etc. Wherever you find premium podcasts, do that. And we'll be here tomorrow as well as Friday. So happy Thanksgiving to you, Norm. I will see you in the morning, my man.
You will.
Bye.